Good morning. So any questions up to now? Any questions regarding cooperative? Okay, so today we are going to discuss the corporate governance approaches, right? So these are the topics we are going to discuss under the corporate governance, right? So already we have discussed 5 topics, right? Got it, right? Yeah. So when it comes to corporate governance approaches, right? So basically we have to discuss about 2 approaches, right? 2 approaches. So what are they? Do you have any idea? Corporate governance approaches. So we know the corporate governance is not legalized thing, right? So we can use 2 different approaches. So one is we call it as rule-based approach, right? The second one is principle-based approach, right? So what is the difference between the rule-based and the principle-based? Yes. Rule. So when it comes to the corporate governance, so we all know it is not compulsory to follow, right? Right. Some instance we have to follow the corporate governance thing is compulsory for example, when it comes to listing, right? So, because it is not compulsory, right? So we can follow two different approaches. One is principle based. What do you mean by principle based? Just what is here for more principle based here. Next one is the rule based. What do you mean by the principle? What do the principle? What do the rule is? Rule එක තමයි 180 බලනවා. Attendance table. That's the rule. Principle හැමදාම lectures ඇවිල්ලා අදාළ ටික කවර් කරගෙන exam එකට හොඳට තියෙනවා. That is your principle. Right. මේ එකම වෙන්නේ එකම දේ. වල class එකට attend. Rule එකකින් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන් principle එකකින් වෙන්නත්. Right. So when it comes to corporate governance, right? So we can follow either rule based or either principle based. Rule එකක් නිසා corporate governance follow කරන්න පුළුවන්. Well, principle එකක් නිසා corporate governance follow කරන්න. So these are two different approaches we can follow. Because the corporate governance is not compulsory, right? Right. So we are discussing these two approaches today, right? So before that, we need to know what is the basis for corporate governance guidelines, right? So corporate governance guidelines are developed as a corporate governance codes, right? So we will discuss in the next week different corporate governance codes, UK codes, right? USA codes, right? Different reports we will discuss. So it's developed using a corporate governance code. The governance code is a document that contains all the principles and rules for managing the organization, right? Then Lanka got the corporate governance code. Lanka yes, any corporate governance codes to Sri Lanka, especially for the organization, for the companies. Yes, anyone knows? So the corporate governance codes issued by Sri Lanka, right? So they have issued a document, a book, right? It contains all the corporate governance guidelines, principles, rules you need to follow, right? And it is a kind of written corporate constitution that is necessary for the group of to set the framework for collective functioning, right? So these corporate governance codes providing a guideline, right? How to direct or how to control the company. So these are the codes, these are the principles, these are the guidelines, right? Right. So when it comes to these guidelines, since this is not legalized, that means it's not legally you have to do this, right? So you have to follow two approaches. The one is, as I mentioned before, principle based. Because you are principally accepting that code, right? You have to follow it. Because it is a rule, you have to follow it. Right? You have to follow it. For example, when it comes to listing routes, right? If you want to list it on the Colombo Stock Exchange, definitely you have to follow the corporate governance codes, some of the corporate governance codes. So then it will become rule, right? It will become rule. For some instances, you think to have a good company, to have a good corporate governance within your company, it's better to have independent or independent directors in your board. That's your principle. Right? That's your principle. What principle you have in the board, tool and in the board. Here, who is our classical in the two some are even some are either going to be the way. Right. Here, Asu Balnisa, that's the eager got on the side. Here, Asu Balnisa again, rule based. Right. Eager got on the side, work principle, I can have classification. Right. Right. So likewise, when it comes to corporate governance, also when I'm following the corporate governance, so these two approaches you can use. Right. These two approaches you can use. Right. So when it comes to this corporate governance code, why we need the corporate governance? So these are the few examples why we need this corporate governance code. We have discussed this. The one is corporate scandals, right? Like Enron, Wirecard scandals, right? because of these scandals, right? We need corporate governance codes, right? The Lanka case, Lanka got the Colombo bank case, Lanka got the Srilanka group case, like maybe so many company corporate governance study to this, right? Company actually relates from there, it comes from any sort of corporate governance codes, we have a developed, okay, corporate scandals, right? Right. Then quality of accounts, right? So we need quality account to make decisions, right? We have discussed because if you are presenting the correct numbers to the stakeholders or the shareholders, so then only they can take good decisions or the correct decisions, right? So the second reason is quality of accounts, right? To have the quality of accounts, you need to have a governance codes, right? Then investors concern. We know there are conflict of interest. We have discussed, right? Definitely the conflict of interest is there, right? To mitigate this conflict of interest or to minimize the conflict of interest of certain level, right? So we need some control, right? Then only investors will have some sort of comfort in our company, right? So therefore that's a next reason why we are developing the corporate governance for investors concern, right? Then institutional investors, we have discussed this one. Institutional investors is who? The companies who is invested in another company, right? So they are concerned about the other companies, how these companies are controlling, how these companies are driving to the strategic goals. So that is why we need corporate governance codes, right? And regulatory initiatives, right? Right, regulatory initiatives like listing rules, right? So if you want to list it under the Colombo Stock Exchange, you need to follow the corporate governance codes or the listing rules, you can say, right? And social expectation, right? So society is looking at the responsibilities and the ethical behaviors of the company. So they are looking at the CSR, corporate social responsibilities of the companies. So therefore, they are looking at how these companies directing and controlling the good balance. So therefore, these corporate governance codes are very important, right? Very important, right? So these are the driving forces of corporate governance code. Why? Basically, you can say why we have developed the corporate governance codes, right? So these are the reasons, right? These are the reasons. One is corporate governance scandals, right? And the investors' concerns, right? And the quality of accounts and institutional investors, regulatory initiatives, social expectations, right? And when it comes to the problem we have discussed, that means these are the problems from corporate governance scandals, investors' concern. To address these problems, we are having the code of best practice, right? Right. Right. So when it comes to these code of best practices, there are different best practices. We will discuss in the next week. Right. When it comes to the UK, they are having a different practice. When it comes to USA, they are having a different practice. When it comes to Srilanka, we are coming from the USA. Right. Right. So different practices are there. Right. So therefore, these corporate governance codes ensure you can remember we have discussed transparency, accountability, and integrity for the successful running companies and forming solid professional relationship among its stakeholders. Right. And also the development of these codes has also been promoted by the needs to clarify, right, in the law. So there is a, when it comes to the corporate governance codes, we know it's not legalized, but it's help to the legal efforts. Right. Right. It's help to going the companies in a legal way. Right. So they have company a corporate governance codes. Even is a corporate governance codes follows the company control direct. Right. It's like a unequal income. They will low income company. Low income. Right. Low income was nothing. Like corporate governance codes that people are right. Business like IT car and IT car විරුද්ධව මැනේජර්ස්ට වැඩ කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඒගොල්ලෝ ඔය corporate governance course තියෙන නිසා ඒගොල්ලෝ ස්ටාර්ට් කළා දෙන්නේ corporate governance course වලට වැඩ. So these corporate governance course can be either be and rule based or principle based. So this is today's discussion. right? So when it comes to these corporate, the developed corporate transports, either rule-based or either principle-based, right? The rule-based and the principle-based approach differ in communication, management, and monitoring of. Right. So in these three aspects, this principle-based approach and the rule-based approach is changed. Right? Right? Change. Right? All right. So these are the two approaches. Right? The rule-based approach, right, is coming from the UK, so USA, and principle-based approach is coming from the UK. These two different approaches. Right? Okay. So my question is, what is the best approach to Sri Lanka? According to you, either rule-based or principle-based. Rule. Rule-based. Yes. This side rule-based. Yes. Rule-based. Yes. Principle-based or rule-based. Rule-based. Right? Yes. Principle-based or rule-based. Rule-based. Right. Right. Everyone is very rule-based. Why? What's the reason? Why you are saying so rule-based? Okay, they're true. That means Sri Lankan people, they don't have this much. Yes, principle or rule. Principle. Okay, people are asked. Why? Huh? I can't hear you. Okay. Yes, why you are saying rule-based?
Is it follow rules and streets
Is it follow rules?
easier to rather than having
Because it's already there. So we have follow. Our rules is no
there's proper guideline rather than sitting on principle.
Yes, why you are saying rule-based and rule-based way. Do nothing. Okay. If there are no rules, then company will do nothing. Right. So if I say we rather than going for the rules, we can go with the mix. Is it okay? Is it a kind of a appropriate way? So I will tell you when it's not the rule, right? There's no flexibility. Right? Or a rule that there is no flexible name. There's no flexibility. You have to adhere to the rule. Right? Adhere to the rule. So when it comes to Sri Lankan economy, so let's forget about other things. So we are discussing the corporate sector, right? The companies. So when it comes to the Sri Lankan companies, most of the Sri Lankan companies are SMEs. Right? Most of the Sri Lankan companies are small, medium enterprises. Right? So let's say we are having a rule that every company needs to follow the corporate law. So legalize. You are not following it. You have to penalize. Right? So that's the rule. Is it okay? Is it okay? Can you do it? For example, when it comes to the board composition, right? According to listing rules, they are saying that you need to have a more independent directors, right? More independent directors, non-executive independent directors. So when you are acquiring non-executive directors, so we have to pay more. So some companies can't pay up. In that perspective, we need to move. Right? එතකොට අපි rule based approach එකට ගියොත් එක අවශ්‍යතාවට flexibility ගන්න. Flexible නැහැ. දැන් ඔයාලා ගත්තොත් ඔයාලට 100% තියෙනවා. Flexibility ගන්න. Flexibility ගන්න නැහැ. අර ඔයාලා 100% තියෙනවා. ඒතර ඔයගොල්ලෝ මොකද කරන්නේ? Flexibility ගන්න. Yes. What you are doing? But you have seen. So you are searching for loopholes. See, loophole one. The overall company ke part you know solution ta wala kara lenge. Roots them up in moving. Wala kara tao. हमें बालों फाइनलैंड तीन टाइम बोली. Right. Loopholes. They are searching for loopholes. For example, when it comes to Inland Revenue Act, Sri Lanka. Right. So when you are analyzing the Sri Lankan population, only 7% pay tax, income tax. Only 7% of Sri Lankan people pay income tax. Right. But when you're analyzing the Sri Lankan population, more than 20% must pay tax. But only 7% is paid. Right. Only 7% is right. Because we are having a rule. Right. If you earn more than 150,000 pounds, right? It goes up to 150,000 per month salary. So you have to pay tax. Then we have overlooked. 1,50,000 වඩා මාසෙකට ගන්නවා අනිවාර්ය ටැක්ස් ගෙවනවා. ටැක්ස් ගෙවන්න නැත්නම් රූල් එක ෆලෝ කරන්න නැහැ. වැරදි. right. ඒක criminal offense එකක්. If you are not paying tax, it's a criminal offense. අපරාධේ වරදක්. I have told this. I think previous. අපරාධමය වරදක් පුරා මොකද? criminal offense එකක්. ඒක තමයි කරන්න පුළුවන් දක්ම අපරාධය. ඒක අපි දැන් ඉන්දියාවේ මේ criminal offense. right. අපරාධ කරනකොට ඒක criminal offense. ඒ ගණේට අයි දිනනවා tax ගෙවන්න. එතකොට 7% තමයි tax ගෙවන්නේ. හැබැයි 20% විතර tax ගෙවනවා. I think rules තිබිලත් ඒක විතරයි. There are loopholes. People, because it's not flexible, people are searching for loopholes and they are going from the loopholes. When it comes to rule-based approach. So here you have to come to the what we call the sub-campus. So we are looking at 80% attendance. Right? What you are searching? You are searching the loopholes. So once we give the QR code, you can give it to your friends. Right? Then they can mark that in. Right? So those are the loopholes. Right? So when it comes to rule-based approach, we can't say it's good to have rule-based approach. Sometimes some economics, the rule-based approach is okay. So some companies or some economics, the principal approach is okay. But for some, so you need to have mix. Right? Mixed country. Right? We need both principal and the rule. Right? Because Lanka principal to there, rules to the team. Right? Rules principal, rules some communicate principal thing. Principal and principal based in or rule based in. Principal theory. Right? All right. So let's first look at the. So we will go with the rule based approach. Right? A rule based approach. Right. Can you write? So when you come to rule-based approach, right? Rule-based approach to the corporate governance based on the view that companies must be required by law. Right? It's a law. Right? If you are not following the rule-based approach, what will happen? What will happen? You have to realize, right? Because you are breaching the law. Right? Breaching the law. Right? To comply with the established principle of good corporate governance. Right? To have the good corporate governance, you are following the The rules might apply only to some types of companies, such as major stock market companies. However, for the companies to which they apply, the rule must be obeyed, and few, if any, exceptions to the rules are allowed. Right. For example, in Sri Lanka, the listing rules. Right. So that is the example. Listing rules. Right. In Sri Lanka, if you want to list it on the Colombo Stock Exchange, you need to follow the listing rules. Otherwise, you can't. Right. What a Colombo Stock Exchange listed without that. Right. Listed on PLC company, margin right. So if you want to list it on the Colombo Stock Exchange, so you need to follow the listing rule. So that is a rule-based approach. Right. That's a rule-based approach for the corporate governance. Right. That's a rule-based approach to the corporate governance. Right. Clear? අපි එක example එකක් ගත්තොත් එහෙම දැන් Enron කියන company එක. Right. Yes. So the company Enron, right? We are discussing the highest kind of scandal, corporate scandal. So when you talk the company Enron, at that time, so they are following the accounting rule. Correctly, right? According to the US GAAP, right? You know the GAAP, right? General Acceptable Accounting Principles, US law, like IFRS, your LKS in Sri Lanka. So in USA, we are following the GAAP, right? We are following the GAAP, right? So according to that GAAP, they have prepared that accounts, right? Enron company's accounts, right? But what they have done, they have followed, they have find out the loophole in that GAAP, and they have prepared the financial statement accordingly, right? So even though the rule-based approach is followed, right, because it is not flexible, people are searching for loopholes, right? So we can't say the rule-based approach is good, right? අපි අතොත් දෙන්න අපිට කියන්න rule-based approach එක හොඳයි. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට South Korea, right? That leader is there, right? So it's a rule-based country, right? So you have to stick with the rules. So otherwise, what will happen? You will vanish, right? Right. So it's it can't be applicable for everything, right? Now we don't know Lanka, we make a rule like that. Flexible then. Or Renata, getting more of it. Right. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට ඔයා පාරේ හරියට ආවෙ නැත්නම් පාරේ ඉඳගෙන right. නැත්නම් සැප් එකට හරියට අත වෙද්දී ආවෙ නැත්නම් මා අත වෙද්දී ආවෙ නැහැ. අත වෙද්දී ආවෙ නැත්නම් ගෙලිනවා. ඉරියට තමයි. right. සමහර තැන්වලදී rule based approach එක යන්නේ right. right. සමහර තැන්වලදී අපිට rule based approach එක යන්නේ right. right. So when it comes to the characteristics of the rule-based approach, right? The first one is emphasize on the achievements, right? Rule-based system places more emphasis on the and disclosure requirements are emphasized for whether or not targets have been achieved. However, there may be little incentives to achieve more than is required by the rules. Right. So in the rule-based approach, right? So they have set a kind of rule. For example, you need to achieve every year, you need to achieve 10% of profit. Right? Right. So if they are achieving more than that, not because we have achieved the rules. So if you are not achieving the rule, what will happen? So you have achieved some punishment. Sometimes your bonus will be reduced, your salary will be reduced, right? So emphasize on the achievements. Compulsory compliance. Definitely you need to comply with the rules, right? Definitely you need to comply with the rules, right? Rule-based approach allows no leeway. The key issue is whether or not you have complied with the rule. There is no flexibility for different circumstances. Different levels. Right. As I mentioned, because we are having SME. Most of companies, our companies are SME. Right. So they are still developing. So we can't go with the rule base. Right. We can't say you need to follow. For example, as I mentioned before, if you are following the corporate governance codes as a rule-based approach for all the SMEs, it says you need to have more members in the audit committee as non-executive independent director. Right. So some companies they can't do this. Right. It's very difficult because these companies are very small. Right. So they can't bear that cost. Right. Right. And visibility of compliance, it should be easy to see. As I mentioned before, it's already there. So you know you have followed this. Right. Whether there has been a compliance with the rules. Comparison between companies should be straightforward. However, that depends on whether the rules are ambitious and the carrying of the evidence of compliance or non-compliance. Right. So if the rules is there, we know the rule. Right. For example, 80% of attendance. We know the rule. That is the rule. Right. If you are not coming, right, you can see the difference. This is the rule. This is what you have achieved. So you can see the difference. You have not complied with the rules. Right. Or comply with the rule. But this can be decided by using the evidence. Right. Then සමහරට ඔයගොල්ලෝ ආගෙන යනකොට QR scan කරලා attendance mark කරලා දීපු බං දෙන්න. Right. Right. You can do right. Right. So therefore, sometimes the rule-based approach, as we expected, rule-based approach is not performing accordingly. Right. Limitation of rules. Enforcers of the rule-based approach, regulators, auditors, they find it difficult to deal with questionable situations that are not covered sufficiently in the rule book. There's some more allowed the flexibility and right. There's no flexibility. Right. For example, so you need to be there at 8. Right. That's the rule. There's no flexibility. Right. But I know, right, because of the rain, because of the what do you call the traffic, right? You can't come at 8. Right. But I can't do nothing. I can't do anything. Right. It's a rule. There's no flexibility. Right. So there's some limitations is there, right? Because we have to follow the rule book. Right? We have to follow the rule book. Right? Some questionable situation, once the questionable situation come, we can't do anything because it's not flexible. Then සමහරලාට දැන් ඔඩිටර්ස් ඔඩිට් කරගෙන යද්දී right රූල් එක තමයි මොකද රූල් එක ඔඩිට් එකේ රූල් එක මොකද්ද ඔඩිටර් කෙනෙක්ගේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් එයා ඇක්සෙප්ට් කරන රූල් එක මොකක්ද මැටීරියල් ලෙවල් එක තමයි රූල් එක මැටීරියල් ලෙවල් එකනේ ඔඩිට් කරන්න හැමෙලේ ඔඩිට් එකනේ right නැත්නම් ඔඩිට් කරන ගියොත් එම අවුත් ඔඩිට් එක කරන්න so when it comes to auditor he is looking at the material level. Right. So some instances, so we can't decide the material level. So we have to adjust the material level based on some situations. For example, so we have decided the material level before the COVID-19, 100,000. But after the COVID-19, so we have to what the material level. We increase the material. So once the COVID-19, before the COVID-19 comes, my material level 100,000. So after the COVID-19, what is my material level? More than 100,000 or less than 100,000? More than 100,000. Less than 100,000. Why? Because the risk is high. So we have to look at more. Right. But based on the rule book, according to the auditor's rule book, right, if you are following the rule-based approach, for these companies, your material should be 100,000. So you can't change. Right. Right. You can't. Right. And when it comes to the criminal sort of thing, because this is a law, so if you are not following the law, right, it creates some sort of law concerns. Right? Even though this is not a big deal, right? Because we are following the rule-based approach, it considers a low case, right? Sometimes not good for the complaints, right? Serious breaches will be penalized by criminal successions. They often take the form of legalization themselves. Notable the Servants Auxiliary Act, which we shall discuss later as the most relevant example of the rule-based approach. The amount of legislation for the business in these kind of legal aspects may give rise to significant compliance costs. Right? Right. So if you are following the rule-based approach, if you are looking at the rules, and if you are going to penalize the people, so it will there will be some compliance cost. Right? අපිට සමහර දේවල් දැන් ලොකු big issues නැති ඒවට අපිට rule based approach එකට ගියොත් එහෙනම් අපිට අනිවාර්යෙන් ඕගොල්ලෝ penalize කරන්න. ඒකත් දෙක 180 කියන it's not my actually I'm not looking at the 80% part. It's not my deal, right? Because I got to my thinking, right? ඕගොල්ලෝ කොහොම හරි කරගන්න ඉච්චර. එන්නද එනවද නැද්ද ඒවම දාලා කොහොමද පේපර් එකට ලියලා දෙනවා ඉච්චර. පේපර් එක ලියලා නැත්නම් බින්දුව දානවා. ඒකනේ මගේ කන්ට්‍රෝල්. But when it comes to examples, they need to have that come. Right? Otherwise, you are not coming. So that's the thing. Right? So it will take some compliance cost. So they have to look at the 80%, right? So if you are not covering up the 80%, they have to send the mails, right? Then they will ask you to come, or you have to pay more, or something like that. So compliance cost is there. Right? Compliance cost is there if you are following the rule-based approach, right? So this is the example for the rule-based code, right? So rule-based code is coming from where? USA, right? Rule-based code is coming from USA, right? So this is the act which shows the rule-based approach, Servants Auxiliary Act 2002, right? So you can see there are 6 key points they have mentioned, right? 6 key points. දැන් අපි හැම වෙලේම කතා මතක තියාගන්න අපි corporate governance කතා කරන්නේ corporates ගැන. මම මේ general examples දුවට we are discussing about the corporates, the companies, right? So there are 6 key points. Sorry, key points they have mentioned. The one is audit partner. Sorry. Audit partner, right? So when it comes to audit partner, senior partner must be changed every 5 years. That is good, right? So when it comes to corporate, according to the Servants Auxiliary Act, every 5 years time, your senior partner should be changed. That's one rule, right? Then restriction on dealing, directors prohibited for dealing in shares at sensitive times. Right? In sensitive times, directors can't deal with any kind of a share transaction. Any kind of a share fund. Right. That becomes the level and IP account done on your own set done IP account share. So directors are US or directors of the bank. A share is the leaders. Whatever share you account deal if you are a director. So right. And you can't do the deal. Right. Then auditors' independence. Auditors are restricted in the additional service they can provide to an audit file. Right. For example, in case of Sri Lanka context, right? So KPMG is providing some services to their clients in different sort of divisions. Right. So they are that company is audited by different partners, but the services is provided by different partner. For example, IFRS 17, right? Insurance. Right, IFRS 17, the services, most of the insurance companies get the service from the KPMG advisory. Right. And also that company is audited by the KPMG other partner. But when it comes to this act, right, if you are giving the audit service, you can't do any other service to that audit client. Right, that's a rule. Right. Then audit committee. Company must have an audit committee will be disallowed from trading if it does not have one. The same thing in Sri Lanka also, right? In the listing companies, right? If you don't have a audit committee, you can't trade. you can't trade. Right? So if you want to trade in the common market, so you need to have a ticker. That's a rule. Right? Internal control reports. Annual report must include statement concerning the internal control system in the company. Right? So you need to have definitely you need to have internal control report. So you need to publish it. It's a rule. Right? In that report, annual report must include the statement of concerning the internal control system in the company. In your annual report, you need to have the internal control report. Right? That is must. Right? That's okay. Right? Then accuracy of financial statement must be vouched for by CEO and CFO. That means CEO and CFO to go through with the annual report and they need to authorize. It's good. Right? So if you are not following the rule, what will happen? They have to realize because it's a legal authority. So that is the rule-based approach. Right? That's a rule-based approach. Right? So when it's on the rule-based approach, right? So there are some advantages as well as disadvantages. Right? Right. Right. Rule-based approach also you have the advantages as well as disadvantages. So what are the advantages of rule-based approach? As you correctly mentioned, it is consistency. Right? Clarity is there. Right? You know this kind of rule is there. Right? අපි දන්නවා company එකක් start කරනවා අනිවාර්යෙන් අපිට audit committee එකක් තියෙනවා. අපේ rule based approach එක යනවා. audit committee එකක් තියෙන්න ඕනේ. අපිට independent directors අනිවාර්යෙන් ඉන්න ඕනේ. ඒක අපි company එක start කරන්න යනවා. අපි දන්නවා මෙන්න මේ දේවල් ටික fulfill කරගන්නවා. So that's a kind of advantage. Provide explicit rules and guidelines which help in maintaining clarity and consistency in corporate governance practices. Right? And accountability. Enhance accountability by clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and expectations for the board members and the executives. Because it's a rule, the accountability will be enhanced. Right? Because if you are breaching it, you are penalized. Right? And the predictability, minimize subject to interpretation of governance practices, leading to more objective and fair enforcement of rules. Right? Predictability is there. They got to them Lanka corporate governance codes, got to them even though the listing groups are there. In some points, people are debating against them. Make it clearly make the concern that come and Lanka companies acting. Right? Companies acting hardly clear what company open them. Private limited company open them. Key the shareholders in on. That's a concern. Right? They get clearly in the it can not flow. Company open කරන්න එක්කෙනෙක් නෝකුයි ඒක තියෙන loophole එක. ඒ කියන්නේ company එක open කරාම මොකද වෙන්නේ? දැන් private limited company එකක් දැම්මම company act එක අහම මොකද වෙන්නේ? ඒ company එකට හම් වෙනවා. දැන් ඒ company එක legally person කෙනෙක් විදිහට සැලකනවා. ඒක දැන් මට මොකක් හරි හොරකමක් කරන්න ඕන කියලා දැන් company එක දාලා හොර company එක හදාගන්න ඕනකට. දැන් මම ඒක කරොත් එහෙම right ඒකේ corporate penalize වුණා මට සිද්ධ වෙනවා මගේ දේපොළ වලින් ගෙවන්නේ මොකද මම තමයි legal විදිහට සලකන්නේ මේ දැන් කියන විදිහට අපිට පුළුවන් මට මොකක් හරි ප්‍රොඩක්ට් කරන්න උනා මම private limited එකක් දාගන්නවා right private limited company එකක් දාගන්නවා එතකොට private limited company එකේ මම transaction කරනවා right transactions කරනවා so බැරි වෙලාවේ private company transaction කරගෙන යන ගමන් මොනවාරි වෙලාවෙ කම්පැනි එක වාහන නොතරි මේ කම්පැනි එකේ ඔපරේෂන්ස් නවත්තන්න නොතරි ලීගලි වග කියන්නේ මම නෙමෙයි ප්‍රයිවට් ලිමිටඩ් කම්පැනි එක තමයි ලීගලි වග කියන්නේ right නඩු දාන්න වෙන්නේ ප්‍රයිවට් ලිමිටඩ් කම්පැනි ෆැක්ටරි රණසිංහ කේස් එයාට පේ කරන්න ඕනේ නැහැ අතන පන්ති විතරයි ගියාගේ මෙලෙන් සම්පූර්ණ මුතු So the company කට එයාට තියෙන company එකට තියෙන වත්කම් ගන්න විතරයි ගෙවන්නේ. So ඒක තියෙන loophole එක. හරි ඕකට එන concern එකක් ආව මොකක්ද දැන් මේ freedom විපාද කියලා තියෙන්නේ. Company act එකේ හරියන්නේ නැහැ. ඒක කියනවා දේශනේ එක්කෙනෙක් ඕගොල්ලෝ කියලා බලන්න. ඒකතර පිළිසුකෝ නැහැ. එක්කෙනෙක් තමයි පුළුවන් ඔපන් කරන්න. මේ විදිහට. සමහරවිට කියනවා නෑ නෑ එක්කෙනෙක් මේ කියලා තියෙන්නේ directors line කෙනෙක් විතරක් ඉන්නවා. director කෙනෙක් විතරයි ඉන්නේ open කරනකොට දෙන්නේ ඒක. company open කරනවා ඒකේ ඉන්නොත් direct කෙනෙක් direct විදිහට දාගන්න පුළුවන්. So there's a kind of a conflict there. Right. Right. So likewise, the predictability should be there. Right. Predictability should be there. And a transparency promotes transparency through a clear reporting requirement and disclosure obligations. Right. So when it comes to financial reporting framework, it is a rule-based or principle-based. When it comes to Srilanka, the cases and the IFRS or the SLFRS, it is a rule-based or principle-based. LKSs and the SLFRS, the principle-based or the rule-based. Yes, the rule. Right? What only the regular convey. Right? The rule. Right? You have to comply with that. Right? Right? Even though you are a private company, even though you are following the IFRS, it's a rule. If you are recording the revenue, you have to follow the 5-step one. If you are recording the lease asset, you have to follow that rules. You have to record the ROU asset and the lease value. Right? It's a rule. Right? So transparency is there if the rule-based approach is followed. And the stakeholder confidence also enhance. Why? Because they know the company's management breach these things. There's a kind of a legal power for the stakeholders. Right? And also then you over again rules not because you are rules the done. Then over see also then over someone technical nothing. Either I'm electric body. Right? Right? So how that is right? So stakeholder confidence will be increased. Increase the stakeholder confidence by ensuring that the governance practices are transparent and consistent. Right? So these are the advantages. Right? That way advantages from going to explain graph for say, case study get on. Okay, study here, Matagari always in when the Meotama rule based approach again make in the Meotama advantages. Right? So then disadvantages. What are the disadvantages? So advantages we have discussed. There are disadvantages. The first one is when it comes to the rule-based approach, it's not flexible. Right? It's not flexible. Right? Flexibility or not. Right? It's very difficult to handle sort of inflexibilities. When it comes to companies, when it comes to corporates, when you're doing the operations of corporates. Right? So making it difficult for the companies or the organization to adapt to changing circumstances and unique situations may not account for the specific needs and context of different organizations, leading to one size fits all approach. Right? Because rule-based approach is one size fits all approach. I'm going to make it. What is the look of the Evan? I'm going to make it. It's all right. Adapt in the area. Right? I'm going to make approach it again. Right? I'm going to make a rule again. Right. So adapt in area. Right? So that is the first disadvantage. And the complexity and the cost. And make it a COVID-19 hour busting. Right? So normally when we are doing that audits, right? So we have to issue the annual report within 3 months of period. So if we finish off the let's say our annual year is finished off at 31st December, right? So normally according to the rules, we have to publish the annual reports before end of March. Right? That is within 3 months period, you have to issue the annual report. Right? I have rule that in that stakeholders are decision kind of doctoritis කියනකොට පස්සේ මාස 30කින් විතර දෙනවා. අනුව report. වැඩක් නැහැ. අඩුම ගානේ මාස 3ක් යනකොට අනුව report එක issue කරන්න ඕනේ. That's the rule. But when the COVID-19 comes, right? What happened to the companies? What happened to auditors? So auditors are doing the audits in that period. So normally, as I remember, in March, COVID-19 comes. So people are doing audit, still they are in the process. So what happened? People can't issue the annual report. The auditors ලාට ආපු මුලින්ම ප්‍රශ්නේ තමයි කොහොමද අපි audit කරන්නේ COVID-19 එක. අර physical document බලන්න audit කරන්නේ. physical යන්න බෑ ඒක නම් audit කරන්න ගියාම එතන ඒකේ මාතක් ලයින්. right. පැල්බැදගෙන ඉන්නේ. තමයි ඒක ජීවත් වෙනවා. වෙඩි වෙලක් විතරයි අඩු වෙන්නේ. audit කරන්න එක. right. ඒකවල දැන් ආපු අනිත් ප්‍රශ්න තමයි අපි කොහොමද audit එක කරන්නේ? physical documents බලන්න බෑ අපිට. right. අපිට යන්න බෑ. right. කොහොමද audit එක කරන්නේ? අපිට මොකක්ද මේ සිටුේෂන් එකට තමයි අපිට ආව ප්‍රශ්න. කොහොමද audit එක කරන්නේ? ඊට අපි follow කරපු එක තමයි evaluation systems වල තියෙන documents අරගෙන system access හදාගෙන තමයි අපි audit කරන්නේ. සහ අපිට දැන් correct වෙන විදිහකුත් තියෙනවා. For example, we have the junior members who don't know anything about audits sometimes. So now we are isolated. But we have ගොඩක් කට්ටිය හොඳට නිදාගත්තා කියලා. Right. So what we have done is we are using the MS teams. Right. MS team then we are monitoring. But then that is how it's developed. So it will take some time. So therefore there is a concern that we can't issue the annual report within that period. According to the rule, we have to do it. Otherwise, the company has to penalize. Right. So if you are following the rules-based approach, if it is not flexible, we can't do nothing. You can't do anything. Why? It's not flexible. It's a rule-based. Right. Because there are some changes can be happen. Right. Some circumstances will be coming. So therefore, if you are following the rule-based approach, it's a kind of disadvantage. Right. It's a kind of disadvantage because the flexibility is not there. Right. And the complexity and the cost. Right. So when it comes to the rules, it's very complex. Right. So if you take the listing rules, I will share the listing rules with you. Right. When you are looking at the listing rules, you can say, movie to down there, you can company list follow before the listing. Right. Very complex and costly. Right. Complexity and the cost is another disadvantage. Right. And overemphasize on the formalities can lead to box ticking mentality. Right. What do you mean by box ticking mentality? ඔයගොල්ලෝ උඩට වැඩි කරලා box එක ටික කරලා වැඩි කරලා. හරි එතනින් එහාට මොකුත් හිතන්නේ නැහැ. So if you are following the rule based approach, අපි කියන්නේ මේක කියන අකුරට වැඩ කරනවා කියන්නේ. right? මට තියෙන්නේ අට ඉඳන් පහ වෙනකන් මෙතන ලෙක්චර් එක කරන්න. මම බැරි වෙලාවත් පහ මාර්ගකට කරන්න ලෙක්චර්. box ticking. Because that is the rule. right. දැන් ඔයගොල්ලන්ට අන්තිම දවසේ සමහරට මොන හරි අලුත් එක්සෑම් එකට දේවල් අපි සාකච්ඡා කරන්න කාටියක් ටිකක් ටයිම් එක ඕන. හැබැයි මම කරන්නේ. right. I'm following the rules. Box ticking only. Right. So සමහර companies වල ඒක හරියන්නේ නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. For example, when it comes to IT companies. Right. If you are following the rules-based approach, they can't do right. For example, when you are going to develop the software develop කරගෙන ඉන්න ගමන් හරි ආයි කියලා දැන් අපි වෙනවා දැන්. මෙතනදී කරගෙන ඉන්න කෝඩ් එක අපිට කරලා දෙන්න. හරි. ඉතින් සමහර ලාට the formalities can lead to box ticking mentality. So you will be developing the box ticking mentality when it comes to the rule based approach. Rule එක follow කරොත් එයි. ඉතින් එහා අපි මුත් කරන්න ඕනේ. Right. Only the box ticking up. So you are coming to the lecture to get the attendance on. So once you get the QR code scan, everything is done. So now you can go home. Right. So that's the box ticking mentality. Right. Where organization focus on formal compliance rather than the substance of good governance and limited scope for innovations. To do the innovation, sometimes you need some space, time, some flexibility. Flexibility and innovation කරන්න බෑ. Right, ඔයගොල්ලෝ හිතන්න ස්පේස් එකක් දුන්නත් ඔයගොල්ලොන්ට කරන්න innovations කරන්න බෑ. You need to have space. You need to have time. So it is limiting the innovations. Potential for loopholes. This is a very big disadvantage in this kind of rule-based approach. Right? Because people are looking at the loopholes. Like, this may be relevant. Rule එක දාපම මොකද කිසි වෙන්නේ. ඒකට හිර වෙනවා. රූල් එකට ස්ටික් කරනවා. මිනිස්සු කැමති නැහැ. ඒතකොට ඒගොල්ලෝ බලනවා ඉතින් ෆයිල් එක. They are searching for loopholes. They are searching for loopholes. So that's why the internet people are finding the loopholes and they are creating the account. Right. And also when it comes to this one also, right, you are having the 80% of root. Right. But you are searching for loopholes. So once we are send it to your friend and friend who is peacefully sleeping in the on the what you call bed. He can the reward process mark that X. That's a loophole. Right. Right. දැන් එහෙම ඇටෙන්ඩන්ස් බැලුවේ නැත්නම් යාට එහෙම පල්ස් වෙලා කරන්න ඕනේ නැහැ. ඉදාගෙන ඉන්න පුළුවන්. අපේ ඉන්න ඕනේ. ඔබට වැඩි නැගිටලා QR ස්කෑන් කරන්න ඕනේ නැහැ. Right. Right. So that kind of a loopholes can be there. Potential for loopholes. People are searching for loopholes if they are following the rules. Right. Strict rules may have loopholes that can be exploited and determine the effectiveness of the governance framework. Even though you are governance framework, we say the governance framework is perfect, rule-based, people are finding out the loopholes. Right. Right. People are looking at the loopholes. Right. So these are the disadvantages of the rule-based approach. Right. Rule-based approach. Right. So then I'm moving on to the principle-based approach. Right. Principle-based approach. A principle-based approach to the co-governance is an alternative to rule-based approach. It's an alternative to the rule-based approach. It is based on the view that the single set of rules is inappropriate for you. Can differ between the companies. That's one reason. Right. Every company want to make a career that they will take care of අවශ්‍යතාව විදි වෙනවා. Right. Like සමහර කෙනෙක් පිට්සා ගන්න කැමති වෙන පුළුවන් සමහර කෙනෙක් ප්‍රයිස් එක කාර්ය ගන්න පුළුවන් ඒක කැමති වෙනවා. Right. So likewise when it comes to companies also different approaches be there. That's the one piece. Because we can't follow the rule based approach. හැමෝටම එක විදිහට යන්න බෑ. හැමෝටම එක නීතියක් සමහරට හරියන්නේ නැති වෙනවා. Right. The best corporate governance practices for the companies might change over time as its circumstances change. As I mentioned before, because of the COVID-19, right? Because of that circumstances, so we have to change the corporate governance code or the principles, rules. We have to change accordingly. Right? Right? So new rule is coming up to the VAT. What is the new rule coming up to the VAT? The VAT, value-added tax, or the new rule. They have implemented a new rule. The new government. Yes. Factor to amendment. One is that yes, that is new. Yeah. Other than that, trying to emphasize the circumstances change. There's a new tax rates is implemented to those who are getting the dollars from the digital platforms. Right. For example, YouTubers. Someone is there. So YouTubers, you are running dollars for YouTube. So they have to pay tax. So they have to pay. And also, if you are buying from the one is taken because of right. So my wife also taking so much of orders. Right. I don't know. Right. So for those platforms also, you have to pay 15%, 80% of tax. Right. AliExpress are the tax fee. So I'll the tax fee. Right. from I think August onwards. From August onwards, huh? Right. So before that, why everything? Right. Before that, before the August, why everything that we do is close to the right. So those are two main reasons. So one set of rules is not suitable for every company. Right. And second one is because the things are changing over time. So we can't say it's good to have the good based approach. So we need to have some kind of flexibility. Right. It is therefore argued that the corporate governance code should be applied to all major companies, but this code should consist of principles, not rules. Right. Guidelines or the provisions should be issued with the courts to suggest how the principles should be applied in practice. As a general rule, companies should be expected to comply with the guidelines or the provisions. However, the way in which principles are applied in practice might differ for some companies, at least for some of the time. Companies should be allowed to ignore the guidelines if this is appropriate for their situations and circumstances. When a company does not comply with the guidelines or provision of a code, it should report this fact to the shareholders and explain its reason for non-compliance. Right. So when it comes to this principle-based approach, we are following a kind of a thing we call it as comply or explain. Right. Either we can comply with the principles or we can explain. What is that? Comply or explain. What's the meaning of that? The principle-based approach, since it is a flexible, right? You can either comply with the rules or explain. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Follow the principles or explain like that.
Yes, correct. Right. For example, so we can say when it comes to auditors, right? When it comes to auditors, we can say according to the auditing requirements, auditing guidelines. So this is the material level you need to maintain, right? So you can say, so you are going below that, right? Below that. So let's say my appropriate material level is 100,000. We are going for 60,000, right? So you are not complying with the rule, right? Or principle or the guideline, right? So then what you have to do? You have to explain why you do this. In the principle-based approach, you have to do, if you are not complying with the principles or the guidelines, you need to explain why you not doing it. Right? In the principle-based approach. Right? You are making it. Comply with comply with that, or you are not making it. You are complying. What's the reason for that? Right? So that is the principle in the principle-based approach. That's a first two principle in the principle-based approach. Right. So the characteristics of the principle-based approach: focus on the aims. The approach focus on the objectives. For example, the objective that shareholder holding a minority of shares in the company should be treated fairly, right? Rather than the mechanism by which these objectives will be achieved. Possibly, therefore, principles are easier to integrate into strategic planning, and the flexibility cannot easily be applied. A principle-based approach can lay stress on those elements of corporate governance to which rules cannot easily be applied. Right, across different legal circumstances rather than being founded on the legal regulations for one country. Right, that हमारा रखा होता है कि legal aspects के लिए, right, right. Now we are going to Bangladesh, Pakistan में तो देखो उनकी legal aspects है ना सिर्फ, right. USA का तो देखो उनके बिना नहीं, right. Russia का तो देखो उनके बिना मत कीजिए. तो what rule based approach के लिए तभी US Servant Auxiliary Act का करंट जो देखो समानता है क्या suitable लेते रहते हैं, right. Rule based approach है. Role of capital markets, principle-based approach have often been adopted in where the governing bodies of stock markets have had a prime role in setting standards for companies to follow, right? And also comply or explain, that's a the basic one, right? So you have to remember where principle-based approach have been established in the forms of corporate governance codes. The specific recommendation that the courts may have been imposed on comply or explain basis. So you have to comply, otherwise you have to explain, right? The approach of comply or explain may be applied in UK. With a comply or explain approach, stock market companies should be required to present a corporate governance statement to their shareholders in which they state that they comply with all the provisions or guidelines in the code of applying the principle in practice, explain their non-compliance with any specific provision or guidelines. Right. Even though they are following the principle-based approach in UK, right? So you have to say in the annual report. So these are the guidelines we have followed. These are the guidelines we are not followed. Why? So you need to mention the reason why you are not following. So the flexibility is there. Right. Why do you follow the correct? Have I got known stakeholders? You are correct. Right. Right. But here no reason you are correct. Udaharanakku annual report ma mass meeting data verify. You are correct. You also quite right. So for the principle, you have to publish the annual report within 3 months of time. So what we can't do it. Why? Because of this different circumstances. Because of the point line, because of the economic position. Right. Like us, you need to explain why to the stakeholder. They know this stakeholder now. Maybe to comply with that, by someone not comply with that, then maybe they will accept the then stakeholder can decide. Right. So here you can see companies should offer clarity about the positions of the code of the that are departed from any making easy for the readers to find this in the annual reports. So you can see the two examples below are first from the governance statements that not departure from the courts, but do not clearly state the provision or where the expression can be found and therefore do not provide sufficient clarity. Right? But මේක හරියට එයා කියලා තියෙනවා මේවා කියලා හැබැයි හරියට පෙන්නලා නැහැ කොහෙන්ද මේක වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. For example, first one, other than where expressly stated below, throughout the financial year ended 31st December 2019, the company complied with all relevant provisions of the codes. The board is committed to highest standards of corporate governance and ethics. As set out below, the board has complied with and intended to continue to comply with the requirement of the UK corporate governance codes. Right. Right. We expect companies to make departure clearly by naming the provisions. December 2019, the company will comply with all the provisions of the code, except for the provision 9, and we have provided a full explanation. Right. So that is how you need to report. This is not the way. Clearly, departure follow කරලා නැත්තේ මොන section එකද? සහ ඒකට අදාළ explanation. So that is how you will report. This is the correct way. Right? This is the correct way. Right. So you have to write these things out. The practical scenarios, case studies, right? So you need to find out and you need to write these wordings. So you need to explain why you are not compliant. By looking at the case study. Right. So advantages and disadvantages of the principle-based approach. Right. Right. Avoid the legal aspect is not there because it's a principle-based approach. Right. It's not legal thing. Right. Right. It's not legal thing. So there is no involvement of legal sort of thing. And less costly. It's less costly. Right. Because it's flexible. Right. Appropriate for the companies. Right. The flexibility is there. Emphasis on the explanations. Emphasis on the investors' decisions. Right. The disadvantages, broadness of the principles. Sometimes the principles are very broad. Right. Misrepresentation companies' attitude, consistency between the companies, confusions over rules, inadequate explanation, investor misunderstanding. So I have uploaded the document which is especially highlighting the advantages and disadvantages of principle-based approach. You can download it from the LMS. And it will provide a comprehensive idea of all the advantages and disadvantages. Right. Right. So now I'm coming to the examples. Right. So I think after looking at these examples, right, you can identify what is the difference between the rule-based approach and the principle-based approach. Right. The first scenario, right, regarding the financial reporting. Right. Right. A company has discovered an error in its financial statement. Don't talk now. A company has discovered an error in its financial statement that is not material and correcting it would delay the report and be costly. What will happen? A company has discovered an error. There's an error in the financial statements. Right? It is financial statements. That is not material. It's not material. Right? It's not material. And if we are going to take it will costly and take time. Right? So if you are following the rule-based approach, what we have to do? If you are following the rule-based approach, what we have to do? Rule-based approach. Definitely you are correct. Even though it's not material or any other thing, definitely you have to correct. Because you are following. If not, it might choose not to correct the error immediately, but disclose the discrepancies and correct it in the next reporting cycle, explaining the reason. Right. So first you have to assess whether it's impacted to the decision maker. So if it is not, right, you can go forward. But when you are going forward, what you have to do? You have to correct. If it is possible to correct, then you have to correct. If you are not correcting it, you have to explain why. So you have to show it. This kind of discrepancies is there. For example, when it comes to the auditing, so we are having a document called unadjusted audit misstatements, right? Unadjusted audit misstatements, right? Statement of unadjusted audit misstatements or something like that. Different audit firms are using different words. In KBUT, we are using as score. Right, and follow against what? Sorry, right, unadjusted contribution. So we are reporting these things. We are not adjusted in the financial statement. Whenever we adjust करा नहीं तो हमें financial statement डाला थी. So we have provided comply of right. In the principle-based approach, you can do either comply. Oh, it's great. But when it comes to rule-based approach, definitely you will recover. Right? Clear? Right. Scenario 2, conflict of interest. A board member is found to have a potential conflict of interest due to family member working in a competing firm. Right? Board member can have a conflict of interest because his family member is working as a in a competitive firm. Right. So, according to rule-based approach, what we can do? Rule-based approach. Rule-based approach. We have to maintain the independence. So, director should be taken off from the electricity. Right. The member is required to disclose the conflict and would reuse themselves from the related discussion and decisions as per the rules set forth. Right. Right. So board member definitely take out from the discussion. Right. Principle based approach. What we can do. The board member disclose the potential conflict and the board discuss the appropriate action, which may still be recasual, but it's designed based on the principles of preserving the board's integrity and objectivity rather than a specific goals. Right. So the board member needs to disclose this kind of thing is there. So my is working as a director in another company, the competitive firm. Right. So what we need to do, what I need to do. So then board members will decide. Right. So they will decide either comply or if it is not comply, you can explain why. Right. So on a pulang direct why you can right. So that is the principle of the approach. Right. But when it's a rule based approach, direct why you can right. The independence with that's a rule. Right. Then the third scenario, whistleblower. Third scenario, whistleblower. Right. An employee has reported a case of minor non-compliance with environmental regulation. So what do you mean by whistleblower? I told you yesterday, last week. Yes. Whistleblower? Who is the whistleblower? For me, class A was a class A going to mother. A class A. Yes. What to do? An employee has reported a case of minor non-compliance with the environmental regulation. When you follow the rule-based approach, because we have the rule, zero tolerance. Right. Right. No tolerance. Right. So in the principle based approach, what we can do? We can ask that student to come to the staff campus and you have to give some evidence because you have a kind of a health issue, kind of a family concerns, right? So then some flexibility is there in the principle based approach. But when it's the rule based approach, definitely if you are not having 80%, no excuses, no exam attendance. Like for the quiz, right? No excuse. Rule-based approach is following the rules, right? The company has a zero tolerance policy for any non-compliance and thus initiates a full investigation followed by corrective actions and possible disciplinary measures. Right? They will take the disciplinary measures and the corrective actions. Zero tolerance. But when it comes to principle-based response, the company assesses the impact of the non-compliance. If it is minor and not harmful, the company might handle it internally without a formal investigation, but take steps to prevent future occurrence and explaining approach to the stakeholder. Right. Right. That means rule-based approach you follow करना हमारा company का आवाज ये सब पूछ. Right. Because most of the companies are running with a reputation risk. Right. There's a reputation risk. For example, let's assume that SAP campus lose their reputation. What will happen? Now, over a year ago, home take your large 30 years over how jobs because you have the secret of SAP campus. So what will happen to SAP campus? No one will come again. The reputation risk is there. So if you are following the rule-based approach, if such kind of incidents happen, right, even though it's a minor concern, that employee will taking out from the company. Right? So some kind of a reputation risk can be created. Right? Then somehow company can own nothing they will get 40 days because we are following the rules. But when you are following the principle based approach, the flexibility is there. What we can do? We can assess. Right? We can assess and see whether what is the action we have to take. Right. So this is the action we have to take. So flexibility is there. When it comes to principle-based approach. Right. Principle-based approach. Then board diversity. Right. A company board consists entirely of members from the same demographic and similar professional background. Right. Become a professional background. Right. So when it's called rule-based approach, the rule-based approach, we need to maintain diversity. If regulation requires diversity, the company must restructure its board to meet specific quotas and face penalties. Right. The rule එකක් දාලා දෙනවා අනිවාර්යෙන්ම 150 ඉන්න ඕනේ. Female male. දැන් අපේ company එකේ ඉන්නේ 60ක් males සහ 140 females. So if you are following the rule-based approach, definitely you need to restructure it. Right. So otherwise you have to penalize. You have to face penalties. The rule-based approach. But when it's called principle-based approach, the company reviews its board composition principles, acknowledging the value of diversity for effective decision making, and voluntarily seeking to recruit more diverse members over time. Right. Right. Clear? Right. So summary. Right. So we now legal requirement. And rule-based approach, code of corporate governance is a set of legal requirements mentioned in the act. Right. And based on principle-based approach, corporate governance code is a set of best practices that companies should follow. These are the best practices. Right. But these codes are in the act. Act again, you know, like a legal. Now, we're going to look at Srilanka corporate governance codes in more. Best practices in corporate governance. Right. And remember, best practices in corporate governance. So these are the best practices you can follow. Right. If you want to follow, these are the best practices. So it is principle. If it is included in that, every individual in Sri Lanka who is earning more than 150,000 rupees for the year, for a month, so you have to pay tax. That's a legal. Right. Right. So when it comes to code, if it is become a best practice, it will become a principle-based approach. If it is a legal thing, the rule-based approach. Compliance or non-compliance, judgments are being made by the court. Right. Very important, right? Now we are in the where one compliance in the way he decide to court. The company has been another or I company or it committee got that. So they get a lot of the current company or it committee got that. So they get the judgment or because it's a legal thing. That's why the corporate governance is not legal. Legalized. Legalized one of the court is right. Compliance or non-compliance judgment are being made by the owners of the business. Or shareholders or directors. The representative of the shareholders. Taking the decisions. For example, that the independence issue in the director. Right? Discussed by the director board. And they will decide. But when it comes to rule-based approach, if you are breaching the independence, if it is going beyond that, so you have to go to the court to decide. Right. Practically, it is difficult to set up rules that are suitable for every set of circumstances. This is usually approach which most organizations in the world are practicing because it is flexible. Non-compliance will result in heavy penalties in the forms of fines. Non-compliance will result in explanation to shareholders by the board. So here, if you are non-compliant, you have to pay penalties, heavy penalties, right? Heavy penalties, and if you are non-compliant. So if you are non-compliant in the principle-based approach, what you can do? You can explain to the board, in then you can explain it to the shareholders. Why you are the principal based approach එකේ ඕන කරන් දක්වන්න පුළුවන් කියන දන්න එපා. දැන් බැරි වෙලාවකට non comply වෙලා ඒක shareholders ලා කියලා shareholders ලා ඒකට case නම් ඒගොල්ලෝ පුළුවන් මාට නඩු දාන්න. right. ඒගොල්ලෝ පුළුවන් civil case එක ෆයිල් කරන්න. right. the principal based approach එක නිසා සර්ගේ විදිහට අපේ rules වලට අවුලක් නැහැ. ඉතින් legal case එක ගන්න court එකට යන්න ඕනේ එහෙම නැහැ. මේක directly court එකට යනවා but indirectly we can go. Yeah, continue the non-compliance. If it is harmful to the company or shareholders, if the shareholders assess it is harmful, then they can go to court. Right? In the principal based approach. So this is the summary. Right? Is it clear? Now is it clear on the rule based approach and the principal based approach? How we are approaching these two kind of situations or these two kind of approaches? How we are using? Yes, clear? Yes. Any questions? No questions? Yeah. Any questions? Nothing. Guys, no questions? Right. So we are having a question, right? So let's have a 10 minutes of break. So after the break, what we are doing is, right? I will make these two. I will make two groups of you, right? So what you have to do is you need to come here. I will give a topic, right? Topic is what is the best method for the Sri Lankan companies? It is a rule-based approach or the principle-based approach. You can't say both, huh? You can't say both. So you need to build a debate, right? Right. You need to say why, right? So you can choose 3 people from one group, right? And you need to give the arguments, right? Is it okay? Right. So that we can do. So before that, we will do this question, right? Before that, we will do this question and then we will take 30 minutes to have that discussion, right? So we will be having 4 groups, right? So first group is ending up, yeah, right? So you are the first group, right? Here is the second group. And the two will be here. One group is starting from this is the group. And four group is starting from there. Right, so let's have a 10 minutes of break. So let's have a මේ වාහනයක් තියෙනවා නවත්තලා පාර්ක් එක. පොඩ්ඩක් ගන්න වෙනවා. GS 8156. කවුද ඉන්නවද? GS 8156. වාහනේ කියන බයික් එක. කාර් එක. GS 8156. Well, have
seeing submit
book keeping auditing paper composting text and I got a feeling of station. All ST transport like stadium application. Power bus,
Ya, kawan saya orang ini, saya begini. Oh, pulang. Oh,
Guys, hear me? Online people. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, sir.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
Sorry, actually, we lost the internet connection. Right now, only the internet connection is there. Right. So what we have discussed is some questions we have discussed. Right. So I will share that those questions with you. Right. Same name, there are so many possible. There are 7, 8, 9. So you are writing the answers to that question, right? So they will understand the answers, right? So make a problem to group your answer, right? Correct. So if you go to the so let's find out how to
Yeah.